So I'm Fiona McMullen. I'm an operations manager with Assist, which is a large domestic abuse court advocacy project that supports victims and children through the criminal court process across most of West of Scotland. The typology of abuse comes from the work of Michael P. Johnson, who wrote the book Typology of Abuse, and it really helps us to understand the different perpetrators and the different violence that victims experience, and that really helps inform how we intervene with that. So I'm going to start by talking about situational couple violence. That's not believed to be gendered. It can be male against female, female against male, can happen in same-sex relationships, and it's not believed to be about power. So it can be one-off or it can be chronic, but largely we believe it to be one-off. And it's when there are arguments that escalate to violence within a relationship, and it's usually to do with something that's going on at the time. So it could be bereavement, pressure on the family for financial reasons. It could be COVID and the pressures of lockdown. But what's important to think about is that on the face of it, domestic abuse can look like situational couple violence because we see it as incidental when actually there's a pattern to it which gives us cause for concern in terms of it being more serious in terms of risk. So situational couple violence can be one-off, not gendered, but really importantly, it's not about power and control. It's not about someone wanting to gain and maintain control over someone else. And then we have what we call intimate partner terrorism, or coercive control, as we also know it. And that's the abuse that we believe to be the most linked to serious physical harm and even homicide. And intimate partner terrorism is believed to be gendered, so we believe that to be largely males towards females, and it's absolutely rooted in power and control. So it's about a perpetrator having an idea that they should be absolutely the centre of the victim's world. Everything should revolve around them and all their needs should be met. It's rooted in rules rather than agreements that we might see in healthy relationships. This is about rules, and the perpetrator has the control of those rules and changes them as they see fit. So again, believed to be gendered, but there's a pattern to it. It may take a long time for a victim to see it, but it starts and develops and escalates. An example of an intimate terrorist, a coercive controller, is Mr. Hart, a man who took the life of his wife and his daughter following separation. Very much, if I can't have you, no one else is having you. Those children, 3 in the family, were brought up with many of the tactics that we see in terms of coercive control: isolation, exhaustion, degradation, threats. I'll talk about them later, but very much like prisoner of war tactics. And he moved them out to the country, to an isolated farmhouse. They weren't allowed to spend money. People would come to visit and he would sit in the corner of the room not speaking and put people off till they stopped visiting. His wife worked in Morrison's and he would pick up her wages on a Friday. Hard to believe now that he could do that. But he controlled all the finances and would make a really big deal if any money was spent, and yet he could lavish a lot of money on himself. So important to remember that one of the tactics is about financial control as well. So the family grew up never acknowledging that they were experiencing domestic abuse. They knew something was wrong, but Mr. Hart never physically assaulted any of them. Now, that might be quite rare, but it's an important consideration when we think about intimate terrorism. You do not need to use a lot of violence. Okay, so if you hit someone once, threaten someone once, that can be enough. So they also didn't recognise that this was abuse. In fact, they say that they were waiting for it to become physical before they would know it was lethal. They also didn't understand that separation is a time of great risk, as that's when the perpetrators lost control. So they believed all they had to do was grow up, go to uni, do really well in their careers, and get their mum and their sister out of the family home. And they did that, and they moved 5 miles away. They took the dog, they took the furniture, and they moved when he was at work. 5 days later, he went to the open-air swimming pool where his wife and his daughter were, and he shot them both and then killed himself. And in his USB suicide note, he wrote, "Karma's a bitch, you've destroyed my life, I'll destroy yours." And the 2 boys do a lot of work. They work tirelessly in terms of understanding what this looks like, what coercive control looks like. And they said if they had known, for example, separation was a risk, they would have ran for the hills, they would have left England, they wouldn't have moved 5 miles up the road. all the family, the children did well at school, they didn't come to the attention of agencies that could have intervened. So lots of key messages in that, really about the lack of physical violence. That doesn't need to always exist, and there can be significant coercive control, and separation being a time of significant risk. Violent resistance is something really quite different. That is about a victim who takes matters into their own hands. So it's about a fight for dignity, a fight for freedom. We can hear it explained as self-defence, but it might be something that a victim does at the time of something else happening to them, so they're assaulted and they retaliate, but it could happen out with any incident. And we believe that absolutely to be something that females use in terms of resisting the abuse they're experiencing. And that can be on a real continuum. So that could be losing it after being criticised for hours, told what you have to wear, told that you can't go out, and you lose it and you shout and swear at someone. But that can go to the other extreme, and the other end of that continuum could be that you kill someone. So we know that there are examples of women who have killed their partners. They've felt that that is the only way for them and their children to be free of the abuse. So violent resistance, not to do with power from the victim. They're not looking for power. They're looking for freedom. They're looking for dignity. And we do believe it to be gendered. Routine inquiry is when we go further than wait for the signs of abuse to ask the question, and we ask the question regardless of whether we see any signs. It's really well recognised within midwifery services, where at a booking-in visit, for example, you'll be separated from your partner and a midwife could ask you if you're experiencing domestic abuse. Really easy to ask. 1 in 4 women experience domestic abuse in their lifetime, so we ask everybody this question. What it does is it gives permission to disclose. It also acknowledges that domestic abuse, we know 30% starts and develops in pregnancy, and it also sows seeds. So often we might find that someone doesn't disclose to the midwife, but later discloses to the health visitor, for example. We want to see that playing out in a lot more services. So we know that we can use it in midwifery. We also use it in addiction services, sexual health services, but there are other more generic services we could think about using routine inquiry in. For example, housing services when someone presents as homeless. So all of this is about intervening at an earlier stage. We know that there's a long pattern of abuse for many victims before they report for the first time, and we want to lessen the time that it takes them to get to support and safety. I've worked with victims for 17 years, and what they tell me is that often they were waiting for someone to ask the question, that if they were to disclose, they wouldn't, but if someone had asked the question, they could have said yes, or at the very least, by asking the question, you sow a seed that you're interested and you care. And often people come back to that later on. So my advice would be, if you see anything that concerns you, that you ask the question. The most you can do is offend someone that doesn't experience domestic abuse. And I'd rather offend someone than miss someone that was at high risk of further harm or potentially murder.